Coming up in this episode.
We took some real risks with some of the projects we went after and won. But that business is now Siva, which is a multi-billion-dollar business. But it all began in a car park in a Portakabby.
The Logistics Collective podcast is a series focused on the logistics industry, where there are many incredible stories to be told. We'll be speaking with those who've worked and are working within the industry today. What have been their experiences, good and bad, since joining, and would they recommend a career in the industry to others? Here's your host, Malcolm Pope.
Hello everybody and welcome to the next episode of Logistics Collective, the podcast. And today I have the pleasure of the company of Paul Carvell, who is a senior non-executive director of the delivery group, but also former chairman of PPS Equipment Holdings Limited, and also non-executive director for Gwyneth Shipping. He's had a stellar and interesting career within the logistics industry. He's been chairman of Diamond Group, senior vice president of Alexander Proudfoot. He's been CEO of UK Mail. He's worked within TNT. And I had a request from one of my senior consulting partners, Tim Fawkes, who remembered you as managing director of Beck & Politzer all the way back in the TDG times. And given all of that list, the reason that I'm incredibly fond of Paul Carvell is he's a fellow Burkonian, so we're both from Birkenhead originally, so welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
So where does today find you?
I'm in a 500-year-old farmhouse in Shrewsbury, just outside Shrewsbury, where I moved in about, 3 weeks ago. Yeah.
How many boxes have you got to unpack?
We're there. We are there.
You really have done incredibly well.
We are genuinely here, yeah. We kicked off on the day and we worked around the clock before we went on holiday, and then when we came back we finished it off, so it's all done. It looks pretty impressive.
Fantastic. So what has working and what does working in the logistics and supply chain industry mean to you?
Well, I guess it's been my life. It's been everything. It's been a source of income, and it's allowed me to meet some incredibly bright people. It's allowed me to travel. It's allowed me to be part of something in terms of growth and growing businesses, developing businesses, changing businesses. So it's been everything since 1976. So I guess I owe everything to the logistics and supply chain industry.
And you don't look as though you've had a career that goes back as far as 1976. I'd put at least, I'd say you could get away with saying starting at 1986. So you're wearing well, sir.
Very kind, Malcolm. Thank you.
Could you tell us a little more about what you do now?
Okay, well, I guess going back a little bit, back maybe 10 years ago, I decided that the executive day-to-day life was probably not for me. So I started becoming, non-exec, taking on non-exec roles. And so today, as you highlighted, I've got 3 non-exec roles, which keep me busy enough, but I'm not involved, as it were, in the day-to-day, more the kind of strategic stuff. So I enjoy it very much. It's a nice way of earning a living.
So for the uninformed, looking at a non-executive director's role, in my imagination, you're using your knowledge and experience, your deep knowledge and experience of the industry to try and help and guide the board of a company to do better. Would that be fair?
That's right. I mean, I guess there's typically 3 facets. One is strategy, to ensure that there is a strategy, longer-term plan for the business. So in addition to the annual budget, you've got some kind of journey that you're on. So I guess that's a key role. The second thing is ensuring you've got the right people in the business with the right degree of expertise and competence. And then the third bit really is governance, to ensure that the business is running as it should do, within the laws of the land and within the financial laws of the land. So it's about people, about strategy, and it's about governance.
Thanks, Paul. I want to go back in my time machine now, and I want to imagine Paul as a child. I want to ask, what was your dream job when you were a child? When you started, what did you want to be?
As a child, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think I wanted to be a musician.
And what is it that you wanted to play?
Oh, definitely a guitar. Like yourself, Birkenhead, just across the river from Liverpool. And when I was 8 or 9, everywhere you went, it was all music. Everything was about the music. The Beatles had started. All the other groups were forming around the Wirral and on Merseyside. And I just always thought, wow, what a great living, traveling around, playing guitars, making music. So if I'm being honest, that would have been something I would have loved to have pursued as a career. It never happened.
Can you play any musical instruments?
I can. I can play guitar, and I take lessons every week.
Fantastic.
So I'm getting better. I'll never be there, but I'm getting better.
Well, I torture my local cats with my clarinet, so there you go. From being an aspirational member of the Merseybeat scene to your first job in logistics and supply chain, what was that?
When I left university, I was on a graduate training scheme with a company called Lex Service Group. And Lex Service was, by its name, indication. It was a group of service industries which included transport, hotels, automotive parts. You had the Volvo franchise for the UK and electronic microchip type stuff. So it was a bit of a conglomerate, a service conglomerate. And I joined the transport side of the business. And having sort of spent about 18 months traveling around different sides of the business, I became a marketing analyst. So my first proper job was a marketing analyst, working for the sales and marketing director of Lex Transportation and looking at things like acquisitions, analysing the market, analysing trends in the market, based in a tiny office in Hatfield.
You obviously a great learning experience, a lot to cover there, and that must have piqued your interest. I mean, what are you most passionate about now for the industry? What really gets you fired up for the moment?
Well, I guess the two main things that keep cropping up. One is the quality of people, getting the right people into the industry with the right skills and the right passion and the right enthusiasm and energy to drive the business forward. And I think the other area which keeps coming back to me is more collaboration.
Sure.
Businesses working together rather than necessarily competing all the time. And we've seen some good examples when companies can work together, they can create something quite special.
I mean, that would be one of my key reflections, really, that despite some of the fantastic technology that we do have in place within the logistics industry, that sort of connectivity either within a single logistics service provider or across the industry doesn't exist. And so therefore we get a lot of inefficiency as a result of that.
Exactly. And I guess if you look at the retail home delivery, that must be the classic situation where you've got a load of vans, half full, inefficient, following each other up and down people's streets, making no money and reducing the margin. So yeah, I think collaboration would be a big goal if ever I could have more control over the industry.
I'd certainly agree with this, and from a very parochial view, I live in a little cul-de-sac of 5 houses, and I did a count one day of how many home delivery vehicles were coming in and out of the cul-de-sac I live, and in one day there were 15 various sprinter vans and transit vans coming in to make a delivery. 15 for a very small cul-de-sac, which I thought was astounding.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess with the growth of home delivery, which has grown probably since the pandemic, the problem gets bigger for the retailers because they reduce their margin, as you know, on home delivery,
sure,
as opposed to store pickup. And as it's grown, the impact of that is getting larger and larger. So, it needs sorting out. It is ridiculous that they're all following each other around, all being inefficient. Someone can't come to grips with that.
So if we waved a magic wand and we put you in control, what would you do?
I'd get all the key players around the table and, with some kind of Chatham House type rule, and just get the debate going of how they can work more clearly together, whilst at the same time maintaining their competitive edge for the consumer.
I certainly agree with you, Paul. I think this is a challenge for the future. It's not just, let's say, within contract or within company optimization. If we're to take on successfully the challenge of climate change, we've got to start thinking outside of the box. So I absolutely agree with the approach or suggested approach that you would take.
And I'm not too sure the consumer ultimately is that worried which van turns up outside, as long as it's got the right product at the right temperature or in the right quantity, and there hasn't been too much substitution. I don't generally think that they would be that concerned.
No, and I think an awful lot of the an awful lot of the vehicles delivering certainly to ourselves are non-liveried anyway. They're white vans.
Exactly. Big challenge.
So thinking across a stunning career, what's been your best career experience so far?
You know, I was thinking about this. There's a couple of things which I look back on with great pride and enjoyed both, I guess, equally, but from a different perspective. The first one was back in the late 80s when a small group of us were running something called TNT Contract Services.
Okay.
And we operated out of a porter cabin in a car park in Atherstone in the Midlands. And we were the tiny division of the parcels industry. So, TNT was well known for its parcels and its same day and its international. A group of us were brought in to run something called TNT Contract Services, which was a fledgling logistics business, third-party logistics business. And that team was quite unique, and we took some real risks with some of the projects we went after and won. But that business is now Seva.
Wow.
Which is a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yeah.
But it all began in a car park in a porter cabin.
I never appreciated that because, in the past I've had Seva as a logistics service provider and also a global freight forwarder working for me. So I now understand a little bit more about where it came from. And I think it's that entrepreneurial spirit I think that we need to capture and have more on within the industry.
I agree. And I remember we kicked off with 2 automotive contracts, which we kind of got because of the overnight parts delivery. Cow and Gate, the baby food. And literally from there, we just went into the brewery industry with Boddingtons. We went into the retail industry with Budgeons. We went into the wines and spirits industry with a number of different companies and just basically spread the skill base across a number of different sectors with some innovation, some automation, some technology. And that business grew rapidly and, as I say, eventually ended up as Seva. The second most enjoyable bit was CEO of Business Post, which was latterly named UK Mail and is now owned by DHL. But in my day, it was a one-trick pony. It was on the stock market. The two brothers, the Kane brothers, still held the majority of the shares, but there was a fair degree of free float in the market, and the share price was about 125. And over a 5-year period, we turned that share price to about £7.
Wow.
Launched 5 divisions, one of which was home delivery, which was, again, pretty innovative for its time, and went on to become a very, very successful business. And the reason I enjoyed it was because of the different hats you had to wear, because you had 5,000 employees, so you clearly were managing a business. You had the city with the expectations that the city has for businesses, and you had the shareholders who were, clearly absolutely focused on their dividends. So I found that one of the most interesting jobs I've ever done because you were constantly wearing different hats. Even though it was the same business, you were looking at it from 3 different angles. And that was, I enjoyed that. That's just about 5 years, I think. And that's probably the one I look back on and think, wow, what a great job we did.
If you were reflecting on the sort of positives and negatives of getting involved with the city as such, what would your thoughts be on that?
Well, the positive is access to funds. I mean, if you need to develop a business, if you need to grow it, if you need capital, if you need expertise, then being on the stock market, all that is available to you. So that's a very positive side. And obviously financially, it can be very, very rewarding if you're a shareholder.
Sure.
The negative is the short-termism. It is a very, very thin line between success and failure. And I think the lesson I learned was, you better keep your numbers down and beat them rather than be too ambitious and fall marginally short.
Sure.
Because if you were marginally short, you would be absolutely caned.
So the message is under promise, over deliver always.
Exactly. Yeah, and they get that.
Yeah.
They don't like surprises. So Yeah, that was an interesting thing. Very, very short term. And a lot of the people you spoke to in the city had no idea what we were doing. I mean, it was frightening at the lack of research and preparation that some of these investors had put into the meetings.
Do you think the sector's undervalued? Because I reflect on it. My view is that it is, because, the wonders of, if you like, let's say Amazon. I look at that, the reality of it is, and say, fantastic achievements. Yes, it's got its pluses and minuses, every single business activity does. But it's a logistics platform with a self-serve marketing website on the front of it that allows you to buy. And so therefore it gets, a massive valuation. And yet we look at most of the capabilities of Amazon have existed in the market for a long time.
Yeah.
I just wonder in terms of, how we value our logistics industry.
Well, I have to say, I think some of the valuations that are out there at the moment are pretty racy. I'd agree with you. Some years ago, I think the kind of multiples that logistics, transport type businesses were getting were pretty low. We're talking 3, 4 times, 5 times EBITDA.
Incredible.
But now, I mean, you've only got to look at what Clipper has been sold for. Pure play, e-com, fulfillment business with a returns bolt-on.
Sure.
Yeah, GXO are paying something, or XPO, I forget which one it was.
GXO.
They're paying something like $1 billion for it.
Yeah.
That is incredible. And therefore, I think the expertise and the skill and the intellectual property and the technology that's embedded in the modern day logistics business is now being valued alongside its peers, and is no longer the Aunt Sally of the industry, which it certainly was when I joined it.
Same view from me. So we've talked about the best. What might be your worst career experience if you talk about it?
My worst career experience is with the old TDG, Transport Development Group, when I was indeed, as you alluded to, the MD of Beck & Politzer. And we had a warehouse which we'd operated for one of the breweries. And it was in Enfield, and it was a regional distribution centre, and it won every accolade that could be thrown at it. It was always winning, awards for the best this and the quickest that and the best quality. And it was just a beautiful operation in Enfield, and was looking after the kind of southeast of England for the brewery. And then they decided they wanted a national distribution centre. They were going to do away with the regionals and go national. So we, as an incumbent regional player, were given the opportunity to go and tender for the national distribution centre. And we won it. That's the good news. And we managed to find a warehouse in Daventry, which had been an old Argos warehouse. It was enormous. I don't know how big it was. It was massive, but it needed to be to hold a national stock for this brewer.
Sure.
So we decided, a part of our approach would be technology, that we'd have onboard computing on the forklift trucks. We would use all the modern day technology that existed. And we're going back into the 90s here. And so we found a warehouse. We'd done the warehouse design and plan. We'd got the latest technology. We had a wonderful rollout plan to gradually start taking stock into the warehouse so that we could get all the training done for the onboard computers and the forklift drivers and everyone else. So it was a beautiful plan, absolutely worked out to precision. And it was kind of just pre-summer, sort of early summer.
Oh, Paul, it's all sounding pretty wonderful so far.
It is, and I'm thinking, wow, this is a big job. We're going to make a lot of money. TDG are going to love Beck & Politzer, and we had our management team in place. And then the sun shone. It was like a heat wave suddenly happened. And the brewery rang our GM, who'd only been in the job for about 3 weeks, and asked him, could he take in a bit of stock? Because they were running out of capacity.
Ooh, hey.
So he said, trying to please the customer, which at the end of the day, one has to do.
For sure.
He said, yeah, we've got plenty of space here. We can take a bit of stock in. Anyway, I got a call to say, Paul, you better come down to Daventry. So why? He said, because you can't move. There's Eddie Stobart vehicles parked all the way from our warehouse down to the M1. So So I jumped into my motor car and went down to Daventry from Coles Hill, where our head office was. And sure enough, you could not move. There was a tail of Stobart vehicles all the way back, and they were being unloaded. I mean, they weren't standing still. They were being unloaded. And when I went into the warehouse, you couldn't move for pallets of booze. And I spoke to the GM and I said, well, the good news is, you've kept the customer happy. The bad news is, do we know where everything is?
There's the thing. And
he said, I've got to say, Paul, I haven't the clue. He said, these things have just been turning up. We've been unloading them and we've been putting them, and the guys on the computers, on the forklift trucks are moving around quickly, but we haven't got a clue. And it got worse. I mean, the more that came in, the worse it got. So I had to ring the guy who ran the brewery, which was the worst task I've ever done, and said, look, you've got to stop it. We can't take any more in. He said, well, we've got nowhere else to put it. I said, unless you turn the tap off, we're never going to get this warehouse up and running. It's full now, and frankly, we haven't even started the contract. So they all came up in their posh cars, and sure enough, they could see for themselves that there was no capacity. We'd basically filled the shed with pallets of booze. And unless they stopped it, and then we could literally reposition the stock into the right allocation areas, then this was going to be a disaster. And it was losing £30,000 a week, which was a lot in those days.
It certainly was.
So that was the worst experience ever. I mean, it had everything. It had happenstance in terms of the weather, new management, new systems, helping a customer. I mean, a lot of positives, but frankly, the whole thing was a disaster. And it took us about a month, I think, to clear everything out so that we could start the thing for real, but lost a lot of money in the process.
As things go, a month's recovery from something like that, whilst I can imagine the discomfort, it doesn't. Yeah. It feels like a reasonable recovery performance to me.
Oh, it was magical. I mean, full compliments to the staff, because they worked round the clock. We moved our head office. We moved the Beacon Policy head office down to Daventry. Such was the importance of getting it right. So everyone anyone was based down there for the best part of, 6 weeks or something, just to fix it. And we did fix it, and it became a very successful contract. But it was just a nightmare. It's like having toothache, day in, day out. And
you need a sense of
humor. And losing money to boot, which is never...
No, it's never good. It's never good. So who's inspired you most in your career?
There's a few people, Malcolm. I mean, when you've been around 46 years, obviously you've met a lot of interesting people and inspirational people. I think going back 30 years or so, people like Alan Jones, Colin Milbanks, people running the parcel businesses in those days, that they were innovators, they were creative. They were trying things out. They were inventing new services. They were creating stuff from virtually nothing. And looking around the world at other operators to see what they were up to and emanating them and introducing new services to the UK. So I think there was a group like that. People like John Harvey, who had Tibbet Britain, and they were creating new stuff.
For sure.
And still are, they're still very much part and parcel of the industry, and wonderful people to meet and to listen to. So I was at lots of them. There's a guy called Brian Bolam I worked with, both at TNT and also GE Capital, which was the Penske operation. Brian was an amazing team builder, team player, creator. So I've met some wonderful people. Sadly, these days, there's less of them around.
Yeah.
There were those days, that these guys were innovators, they were creative, and they took risks. I think these days there's less of those kind of people around.
How do we connect the wisdom of the generations? Because it's that sort of Groundhog Day effect. Because quite often I look at the industry and said, you do things to move to improvement, and then you might go back somewhere, say 20 years later. For me, it was about putting best practice in terms of performance management and relationship management, and then you'll go back, have the opportunity to go and reflect back 20 years later, and you see that all of the good practice has evaporated. How do we actually ensure that if you like, those that are coming into the industry have the benefit of the wonderful experience and wisdom of those that have been here for a long time.
Oh, well, I guess the board system of having non-execs, people who are experienced but are not involved necessarily in the day-to-day, but have been through a whole series of recessions, inflation, transport being at the back end of the queue to being at the front.
So the reality is what we're facing now. A lot of us have seen very similar, perhaps in different form before, and we learned how to cope with it.
Exactly. I remember in the pre-COVID conversations, we were wondering how we were going to cope. And because I remember the 3-day working week and things like that, we were able to put ideas on the table that none of the youngsters had ever come across. They'd never experienced it. So, I think, without making it sound like Father Time, I think a combination of the youth and energy and expertise, and particular technological expertise of the new generation, coupled with the experience of people who've seen the ups and downs of industry on a macro scale and on a micro scale, I think a combination of the two is a very useful thing. And the role of the non-exec, therefore, in that situation, I think is important.
I'd agree with you. Certainly it's important for within the business you're non-exec for. But I do have a question in my mind more broadly across the industry as to how that might happen. But we can't solve everything.
No, you can't.
So, Paul, thinking perhaps about the more recent past, have there been particular challenges that you've had to address and you really bring solutions and rapid solutions? Because we're living in what seems to be a more volatile and on occasion slightly crazy world. Is there any reflection that you have on that?
Interesting, and it's an interesting case study. Just at the beginning of COVID, it was March the 23rd, I was invited to chair a committee with Deloitte and all manner of the good and the great. And it was all around testing, the COVID's testing requirements. The government clearly needed to have some kind of benchmark, and they were trying to find ways of doing a controlled collection operation of COVID tests so they could monitor what was going on across the country. And it became quite apparent to me that the scale of it was such that no one company could do it. It required a collaborative venture. So I rang all the CEOs and MDs of the various parcel carriers around the UK, and I'm pleased to say they all took the call, despite the fact they were very busy with online deliveries. And I explained that we were trying to set up an operation that would collect COVID tests across the country, and that we'd be part of something very special in terms of determining the R level across the country. They all said, bar one, they all said yes.
Wonderful.
And so essentially we pulled together these carriers. The delivery group put together an IT platform, and literally we were able to undertake tens of thousands of collections on a daily basis of samples. And in my experience, it's the first time that the industry, the parcel industry, had ever worked together to a common goal. We alluded to right at the beginning about the competitive nature of the industry.
Sure.
But this was the first time, these companies were going to work together with us, with TDG collating the whole operation centrally. So that was great news, and we were all very excited about the fact that everyone was going to do their part. And I remember just before it was about to go live, we were told it had to be done under cold chain conditions, and that was something we had never planned for. But thankfully, with our experience and our contacts, we were able to pull together millions of ice boxes and industrial freezers and units that can keep the temperature between 2 and 8. Literally, within the space of a few weeks, we were up and running with a national cold chain operation for the first time ever. And it was a great success, and you could see it on the TV. Each time the study happened, the R number would be used, and that R number was coming from the collection samples that we were doing as a consortium. In fact, we actually called it the Carrier Consortium, and it was a great success, and gives me a lot of hope that the industry can work together for the common good.
What lessons do you think were learned as a result of this collaboration? Because collaborations can be tough.
I think you play to strengths. Certain carriers have strengths in certain parts of the UK. They have different volume dynamics. So we were literally trying to play the strengths of each of the carriers and not overloading them in areas where they were under pressure themselves. So it was really about listening to where they were strong, where they were less strong, and making sure that the collection operation reflected that. So it was just listening really, and making sure we work within their resource levels and their capacities. And the computer system we had was able to do that on a daily basis. So it's like scheduling dynamically, if you like. Yeah.
We don't reflect sometimes on what logistics and supply chain does, and we don't reflect on occasion the work that we do is, some of it is about actually keeping people well and keeping them alive. And so it's notable, and certainly from my little old self, I'd like to say thank you to you and all at the delivery group and all that were part of the consortium. Thank you for working together, because clearly it made a difference.
It did, and I think if ever, God forbid, it happened again, we've got a template, and we could get it up and running, in very short shift, I think.
Oh, it's interesting. It is interesting. I mean, I've always been a great proponent of of collaboration, because it just is, in my view, providing that you've got the rule book of how to collaborate in place, it's a great way of doing better, more sustainably, more efficiently, and I truly applaud it. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, what do you wish you had known when you'd started your career in logistics?
I wish I'd have known how important it was going to be. I mean, I alluded to it earlier. Most of my family went to sea, so my involvement, my interest in what we call logistics was really my interest in transport, and specifically my interest in shipping, because my father and my uncles, they all went to sea. Liverpool, as you know, Birkenhead was a shipping port with the Bouffant line, Alfred Hull, Clan line. They're all there. And
yeah, my own father was on TJ Harrison as an engineer.
Yeah, I mean it was a big shipping port, and I suppose at the end of it, I was always kind of quite interested in that side of what we now know as supply chain management, logistics. But I never realised back in 76, 77, 78 that what we were doing was going to be such an important and integral part of where we are now. It really was the back end of most people's thought processes. It wasn't driving anything. It was responding to the marketeers and people like that. And who'd have thought that now these businesses like Amazon, etc., just wouldn't exist if they didn't have a good logistical operation or supply chain. So I wish I'd have known how important it was going to be. What I'd have done differently, I don't know, by the way, but it would have been nice to know this is, I'm part of something here. It's going to be really important in 20, 30 years' time.
I mean, I think that's notable, and I sort of I've shared through a different lens, but I've come to a similar perspective in terms of that. And I think what's been achieved perhaps in the last couple of decades has been phenomenal, but now we need to do it with a conscience. And I think that's the real challenge. I think there's a lot of greenwashing that occurs out there, and I think there's an awful lot of looking at what we've done in the rearview mirror instead of looking forward and saying, how can we create something that is more sustainable and better? And I think that's the challenge for the coming generations, is to maintain that omni-channel position, but do it ever more sustainably.
Oh, great. I agree. And it's a difficult one. I mean, if you got to think about the trucks. Until you can get a truck that's capable of doing a full shift and carrying 40-odd ton, it's difficult, isn't it? Because
it is.
Your workhorse, no one's invented your new workhorse yet to a point where you can use it.
And I think to a large extent, my observation of the industry is that it tends to get stuck in the ruts of, again, I said Groundhog Day before, but it is, it's repeatable repeatable patterns. And I think the introduction of more intelligence, whether it be human or artificial within the industry, would be a help to that. But okay, you might have a truck that has a range between refueling of, say, 500 miles, might be 800 miles, depends on the size of the fuel tank. A battery-powered vehicle in the interim is not going to have that. So what do you do? Well, actually, you look at more trailer exchanges, you look at the algorithms of your transport management system and begin to change them.
Yeah.
I think there's a double opportunity within that, which says if an industry is struggling to recruit drivers because fundamentally the job does not seem attractive, change the form of the job to be attractive, which means going into your management systems and beginning to think about it more broadly. And this is some of the thinking we're putting together within Ligura at the moment. We're quite interested in this area.
I fully understand.
So what's one lesson doing your job has taught you that you think everyone should learn at some point in their life?
I mean, we talk about transport, logistics, supply chain, all the modern terminology, but ultimately it's a service industry. It forms part of business services, and business services are all about people. Doesn't matter, the technology is there, it's fantastic. The truck technology is fantastic and getting better. The warehouse technology is getting better. We've now got drones, we've now got robots. I mean, it's fantastic what's been achieved, but ultimately you've still got to have good quality people and good teams. And that's not going to change. And I think that, investment in people, investment in training, development, building teams is absolutely critical, because without that, all the technology in the world isn't going to make a business any more successful.
So I want to ask a very wise man an interesting question. If you could start a business tomorrow, what would the business be?
I've taken a great fancy to recently.
Go on.
I'd still be in the logistics industry, because I think that's kind of where I'm at. But I think bicycles, delivering product on bikes. We talked about sustainability. I've seen a number of operations over the past year or two, and they're fantastic. What people are doing these days in urban environments with bikes, doing final mile delivery. I'd love to set up a national bike delivery business, because they're all...
Would everybody be on a chopper, though?
Well, I don't know about the choppers, but there's some very good bikes around, and you've got the e-bikes, and, they can get more deliveries done than an average van in London. So, yeah, if I was literally going to do something new, I think I'd be personally investing in a national bike delivery operation, running within sort of 5 miles of most town centres. And then you get the consolidation of delivery, you get the efficiency, you've got the low cost, you've got sustainability and environmentally friendly. You're giving employment to people who are keeping them fit.
Yep.
So that's something I'm fascinated by, and I think we'll see a lot more of over the coming years.
I shall watch out for you on your bicycle. So, in the last few minutes of the interview, I'd really like to focus on giving advice to people considering a career in logistics. So I have a question for you. Do you think it's a good idea for people to consider the logistics and supply chain industry as a top 3 career choice? And if you do, why?
Well, yeah, in terms of top 3, I'm not too sure what the other 2 would be, but it has never been more important, and is becoming significantly more important as an industry. So if you're going to do something that's relevant to commercial, financial, and environmental kind of traits, then logistics is going to have to be the industry to be in. And we alluded to earlier on about the Amazons of this world, but they're fundamentally logistics businesses. And so, yeah, I would say if you want to be a part of something that's exciting, that's relevant, then logistics has to be in the top 3.
Thanks for that, Paul. So what advice would you give to somebody just starting out? How would somebody that's really interested in a career in logistics, how would they find out more?
I have to say, I've been a part of it for many years, and I've been on various committees over the years. But I would think the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport would be the go-to place.
For sure, it was really helpful in the early part of my career.
Yeah, I mean, you are working, if you get involved with it, you're around people who are running really important businesses and companies, you're learning from them, you're getting involved with them. There's the educational side, there's the career side, there's the recruitment side. I mean, everything is there. So if I was giving any advice, I'd say, to sign up. It's not expensive to join, and you will be part of an industry and feel a part of an industry that will propel your career whatever direction you want it to go.
And I think you'd agree with me, it is a superb industry to work within. It's very connected. The word family is often often used, but I think within the logistics industry, it does apply. I've seen a huge amount of kindness and support from people within the industry through my career.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of respect for each other. And I think that's important, isn't it? Yeah, I like the family thing, but there's a lot of competition in the industry. There always has been. Doesn't matter whether you're in parcels or mail or supply chain, logistics, transport, shipping. There's a lot of competition, but there is a respect, and I find that important. You may be talking to your competitors, but there is a respect in this industry, and long may it continue.
Paul, on that note, I'd like to thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think you're one of the industry's stars. I've watched you from a distance and more closely in terms of what you've done throughout, and I think you should be reflecting back and saying, well, wow, this has been a wonderful ride. So thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. It's been a delight to talk to you. Thank you very much.
So if anybody wants to find out more about the people that we interview across the industry, please feel free to go to www.logisticscollective.com. We now have a new platform for all of our podcasts. You can set alerts to when we're issuing new interviews. There's one just about to come out shortly, and we support all of the most common podcast platforms as well. I hope you've enjoyed this latest edition of Logistics Collective, the podcast, and I look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
You can get in contact by email, podcast@logisticscollective.com, or leave a voice message on our website, logisticscollective.com. The podcast is a production by Le Guru.